Good evening. On behalf of the Adult Education Committee, I would like to welcome your participation in the Video History Seniors Footprints on Slave Lake. Could you please begin by introducing yourselves?
Hi, my name is Paul Caffara, and I've been a Slave Lake resident since 1975, and let my wife introduce herself.
My name is Priscille Caffara, and I've been here in Slave Lake since 1977 after we were married. I moved here from Edmonton, and we have been here now. It's since that time till today, which is 2010, so 35 years and 33 years respectively.
I first came up here as a young 26-year-old. It's hard to believe. I'm originally from Canmore, Alberta in the mountains, and I'm the son of immigrant coal miners, and I came to Edmonton and did my medical training in Edmonton. And to ask me why I came to Slave Lake, it was probably for the adventure. I certainly was interested in being a rural country doctor, and my former partner, who was in Slave Lake, Dr. Andy Cobbin, told me to come north and feel the adventure and learn some real medicine. And I think the interest took me to that stage where I came to Slave Lake, and I thoroughly enjoyed the challenges of medicine. And there were lots of fond medicines, just not only in the family of medicine, but in our own family. My wife was a nurse, so we have lots of doctor-nurse stories to go along with our stories. But I came up here and lived in Mountain Ash Apartments starting in, I believe, July of 1977. And in those days, there was just 2 doctors in the whole town. The town was under about, it was around 1,600, 1,500 people. Everybody knew everybody. And I was on call every second night, and the nights I wasn't on call, I got to either rest or play senior hockey, and my wife-to-be would come up and visit me on weekends or when she was having days off.
Yeah, at the time we met as medical people in Edmonton at the Misericordia Hospital, and I was a student nurse and he was a resident. And so for 2 years I commuted to Slave Lake and spent, weekends learning a little bit about what Slave Lake was all about, the people, what the medical community had to offer. And when we decided to get married, I came up here, but he had already established his practice here for 2 years and had already worked, and I have to say I was a little apprehensive after being up here for those 2 years. I could see that the demands of the community were it was demanding. It meant a lot of time away from our family life and our fun time, and it was a lot of on-call and a lot of pressure on us as a young couple trying to set up ourselves.
I think the reason that we stuck it out in Slave Lake is because I had an understanding wife who, through it all, stuck by me. There were times when I would literally go from the office to the hospital and spend most of the night here. And during those early years, times were very tough for getting out and enjoying ourselves. But when we did, we had a good time. We had some very, very nice people that were particularly nice to us. The Bartons befriended us and were excellent people as we came in as strangers to the town. And Keith and Marilyn Pierce were our one and noted babysitters, and Rick and Gail Pratt were very good friends of ours, and we got along well.
I should comment here too that when I first came up to Slave Lake, I was not actually allowed to work at the hospital for the first year because they felt my relationship with Paul was a conflict of interest, so they didn't really want me at the hospital. So that first year I worked at Barton's Drugstore as an aide to Wendy in the pharmacy, counting pills, and I remember feeling a little put out about the whole situation, but in hindsight it was actually really good because I got to meet a lot of people who lived here, and I got to know who was related to who, and I understood how, through Wendy and Dennis, how to get along with people outside of my own culture, the Native community, which I had no exposure to before. And it was a real help in the long run. And then after that first year, the hospital reconsidered their decision, and I was then allowed to start working as a nurse in the hospital, which was fine. And it makes us laugh today when we think about it, but that's just the way it was back then.
I must not forget Ed and Rosita Alexander, who used to own True Value, were also good friends of us, and they always took us out on holidays when we were a little bit too overworked and strained, and we owe them a lot. But the community at that time, everybody knew everybody, and we worked hard and we played hard. I remember every Thursday night we would try, Priscille would work till 9 o'clock at the drugstore, and we would go with the Bartons down to the Burger Baron and have the best mushroom burgers and fries for the week. And then I remember that when I was in those early days, I played hockey, and Priscille would come on some wicked road trips on the team bus and meet everybody, and eventually she got to know everybody in the community, and we were appreciated. And when it came to marriage time, we got married in Edmonton in September the 10th of 77, and I remember the team bus came to Edmonton full of hockey players and their wives and many town people, and we had a good old-fashioned wedding. Her French uncles and aunts and cousins came in from Beaumont, and the convention in West at that time, we just about blew the walls off it because we had a good old-fashioned hoedown.
You want to talk about Dr. Cotton?
And as far as my training was considered, I probably have a lot to thank in Dr. Cobbin, who at that time was an older general practitioner who had moved up about 3 or 4 years prior to me, and from Barrhead and Westlock, and came up here and started his practice and needed help, and this gentleman could do all kinds of anesthetic and surgery and things that I had really, even in training, not been exposed to. And so he taught me everything from anesthetics to surgery to critical care. And at that time, him and I did all the medicine, not only for Slave Lake, but he was driving 1 day a week to Wabasca, and I knew I drove to Wabasca for approximately 10 or 15 years every Friday, and would have a clinic at St. Martin's Hospital, at which that time was just an office, and I would work with the nuns up there and see all the outpatient people from Wabasca and Demery, and that was a thrill. And I'd get home sometimes at 10 or 11 o'clock at night. But through it all, we stuck together, and the hospital staff in those times were great because we would work together, and sometimes we would get called in late at night, and Priscille, when we had the kids, we'd have to quickly find a babysitter, and then off to the hospital we would go and deliver a baby or set an arm. And it just seemed the years flashed by, and Priscille was busy not only doing her work, but she also had time to have 3 children.
I should mention too that at that time there was no such thing as an ambulance service with paramedics and EMTs. We, as nurses at the hospital, we circulated and we did that job ourselves. So often outside of our regular shifts, we would be called in to either fly up to the remote areas to go pick up patients by air, or escort patients to the city by ambulance as ambulance attendants. And that was done for many years until EMTs came into existence and started servicing to the community. It was very difficult because most of us weren't trained, even though we were nurses, we were not really trained for that type of care, and it was just an added stress to all of our day-to-day lives, and it took us away from our homes as well.
Some of the noticeable early medicine that I learned in a hurry was that in a small town you're never off call, even though you weren't officially on the roster. You always had second call, and I remember many evenings being called in on my night off with Dr. Cobbin, and in those days there was no blood bank, and if there was a stabbing or shooting, there was many occasions where I would just lay down, or Dr. Cobbin would lay down, because we were universal donors, and we would give a unit or two of our own blood, and it would go from me into the bag and directly into that patient, and then that patient would be flown to Edmonton, and it was literally life-saving blood. And we'd get a Coca-Cola and a cookie, and then that would be it, and that would be our job. And a couple of weeks later, a month later, we'd do that. So we donated lots of our, not only of our sweat, but literally of our blood in those days. And some of the horrendous accidents were unfortunate in town, and they affected a lot of personnel, but we had to work professionally through a lot of some of the grief that we have seen with family and friends here, accidents, but we got through it all, and we stuck together, and the pleasures of working here were immense. The rewards were great. Nowadays we see so much abuse of the medical system in the outpatient or the emergency department. In those days, literally, people came and they really needed help, and they tried not to bother you after hours. And when you usually got a call, you knew that it was pretty serious. The hospital staff became bigger and bigger. More services became available. Some of the things that I remember was getting our paramedics on board, which would save Priscille and the nurses and even the doctors going out to remote communities to pick up patients. And then we started recruiting a few more doctors, and this became very important with us. We had locum doctors from as far as England and Europe at times coming to us. The influx of South Africans hadn't come yet, and we would get a few Canadian doctors, but slowly our hospital numbers increased, and we started having a little bit more recreational time. We tried to get out to the holidays. When we got married in '77, we moved into a house behind the hospital, and that was handy as far as being on call. We had Dr. Terry Heisler join our practice, and Ed Heisler was a pilot, so that came in very handy for our community, and they stayed many years in our practice and in our friendship, and we continue to have them as friends today. And then I think one of the bright spots was having the cabin out at Martin River.
Yeah, I always said to Paul that the only reason initially that I stuck it out here was because we did have the lake lot and the cabin where we could escape the stresses of our day-to-day lives. We could get away with the kids and have some quiet time out at the lake. There's no doubt that having Slave Lake here positioned on this beautiful lake was a godsend for us in the end. One of the probably a huge impact on us as a medical community also was the flood that occurred in 1980. No, when was the flood? 1988. 1988. When it affected the hospital and flooded the hospital, and it certainly turned all our lives upside down for a number of years. We initially had to go and help the evacuation of all our patients, as there was several feet at least of water in the hospital, and just trying to save equipment and try to keep some sanity amongst ourselves as well as the patients that were there. They were all moved to one of the schools, and then after that we temporarily had to set up a hospital in the elementary school, C.J. Schurter School, which lasted for, I think, probably a year.
Yeah, it was quite a while.
So, those were the downsides, but out of that we were able to acquire a new hospital, which has been a wonderful asset for Slave Lake, and allowed us also to recruit and sell our medical services on a wider scale outside of Slave Lake, bringing in more physicians. It allowed us to offer more services, better equipment, and in hindsight, it improved that area of our community for sure. There was no doubt about that.
Going back to the flood, I remember we were all living in this house, which we are there, and her parents were up, and we were looking at the Sawridge Creek, which is 30 yards away, rise, and her mom and dad were quite worried, and we were worried, and then we got the call that it was time to evacuate the hospital, and we walked over there, and there was literally silt and mud in the hospital corridors. I remember wheelchairing the patients out in the back of half tons, and one of the guys I wheelchaired out was Charlie Schurter, Mr. Slave Lake himself, and he was still laughing. He thought it was quite humorous to be wheeled by a doctor and a nurse through the mud and ride in the back of a pickup over to the Schurter Hospital. And everybody made the best of it. Schurter School. Well, it became Schurter Hospital. And we had a lot of jokes. I remember one of my patients coming to see me and telling me that when Schurter was our temporary place or hospital, that she wasn't going to Edmonton to deliver and that I better be around. And I said, well, we've got to evacuate her. And she said, well, wait and see. And so she was a well-seasoned mother. It wasn't her first baby. And she came in to see me one night at the Schurter temporary hospital, and she was so far dilated already that I think she was the only maternity case that I delivered right in a school. So she can be proud of the fact that she delivered in a hospital and a school at the same time. But we had lots of laughs in those days, and some of the other things that I noticed in the hospital that have changed are smoking policies. I remember when the patients and the nurses all smoked in the hospital and at the nursing station, and now, of course, the health fields have cleared that all up. The outpatient department used to be literally a place that would be a social gathering in the morning where the doctors, we would all have coffee with the nurses, and that was a nice setting because we all wanted to take time and get along with the staff, and nowadays we seem to be a little bit too busy for that. So as the hospital experience and the town got bigger, more people came into the town, the area became more developed, and it's the price you pay with big growth and development is you lose that personality or the fact that everybody is a small family. But it does bring other changes. We've had wonderful events that have been here. We've had the Arctic Winter Games, which was I think a great experience, not only for the doctors and the nursing, because we actually set up a huge clinic for that and pulled that off, and that literally was an international event that went on for I think a week or 10 days, and that was a beautiful getting together of everybody in the town for a winter event. And we were, Priscille and I, not only with the hockey, we were very involved with our daughter in dancing and our two boys in hockey.
Well, volunteer-wise, when you're in a small community, you have an obligation to pay back to your community. That is something that is just necessary. And so whatever your children are involved with, we have 3 children, and when they started school, the obligation at that time was to be involved at the school level. Raising money for playground equipment. I also got very involved when my children were elementary age. I started the French immersion program in Slave Lake, which took a lot of time and effort, probably about 2 or 3 years of groundwork before we were successful in actually starting French immersion in Slave Lake. And it lasted for about 12 years here. It's only actually the last couple of years that the service is no longer available. But I think the benefit was there for those children that were involved in the program at the time. But aside from that, there's just a lot of volunteer reading programs in the schools and things that you just have to get involved with. And I always enjoyed doing that when my children were in school. And then outside of school, you have all their extracurricular activities, and our children were all very athletic and enjoyed that kind of thing. So hockey was a huge part of our lives. The downside of that, of course, being in a small remote area, is you're commuting to just about every game that your children are playing in. So we were basically always, every weekend, Paul would go to one community and I would go to another. Because we had 2 sons playing hockey, we were never together on weekends. We just kind of meet on Saturday morning, decide who was going with who, and then we'd take off for the weekend. And then our daughter danced, so we had that to fit in as well. But, as difficult as this is for most parents, you get through it, and then you reap the rewards of friendships that you develop through community efforts, and your children develop a lot of strong bonds with their friends through community sports and events, and it just builds for a much stronger community. And Slave Lake has always been known for those kinds of efforts that people put into their athleticism, academics, extracurricular, whether it's music or art. And we have a diverse group of people in this community that offer all kinds of things like that. So it's very, very good for anyone who still is moving to this community.
I think my wife, and I have to put that in perspective too, she not only was a volunteer, but in between raising the 3 kids and volunteering for all that, she was a full-time nurse at the hospital. So she, in fact, was busier than I, because when I would be on call, I would be busy at the hospital, and then I would come home some nights during the week, and I would be with the kids, and if it wasn't hockey practice or something, she was in volunteering on another community and committee. And after my hockey days were over, of course, I became involved with the Winter Hawks, and I was coaching it. Coaching them and also managing them. And then I was on the Slave Lake Native Friendship Board for many years, and we were instrumental in getting the addition to the Slave Lake Native Friendship Center with the offices, and then the racquetball courts, which were active up to not too long ago. So we enjoyed that. And then I was also very involved and continue to be involved with the medical staff, and being socially involved with the medical staff, not only at formalized meetings, but some of our formalized dinners, etc., which was involving quite a bit. I was just we were just at a 50th wedding anniversary the other night, and we were reminiscing about some of the things that were new to us. And we were saying we were never exposed to spring oil patch breakup parties, and so that was quite a phenomenon when we came up here. And in the springtime, we were invited to all these breakup parties when the oil patch fellows would come out of the woods in the springtime looking like they had been worked for years and years, and they would have a big party, and it usually involved fresh Atlantic lobster and salmon, and so that was quite a treat for us. And the other social thing that we were laughing at the other night was the adult Halloween masquerade parties, where we would make sure the kids had their Halloween, and then either the night before or a weekend before at the Union Hall or at the Elks, there was an adult masquerade party, and literally people would show up at these parties, all parents, and no one knew who anybody was until the end of the evening, and so that was tremendous. And going back to the camping, we loved the camping. All our friends would take time on the weekends, and our kids learned to swim and windsurf and boat out at Martin Beach, and I don't think you'll find a nicer lake or a friendlier lake. And our family always loved to come up to Slave Lake in the summer.
They felt, when we first were married, Paul's mom and father came up to see us, and they both cried on their drive up here. They kept thinking this was the end of the earth. They just couldn't understand why their son would leave Canmore and come up north to this foreign land with strange people, and they just were very frightened for the two of us, and literally crying when they arrived. But it didn't take long over time that they got to understand why we loved it so much, and then we couldn't keep them away. They were always wanting to come up and spend summers at the lake with us. So it's always a mystery. The North is a mysterious place with a lot of gifts that you learn after you've been here and discover them. So, and they were as well learning with us. So it was a good thing for all of us around.
We would even have her younger sister started out here coming up in the summers when she was age 12, and she came up every summer, and we like to think we had a little influence there, and now she's a very talented nurse in Calgary and a mother, and she still comes up every summer with her husband and children to enjoy the lake with fond memories. We always made it a point to expose our kids to the outside world, and when we were finished our schooling and high school and junior high school or whatever it was, we'd like to get them out, and we did the train ride to Vancouver if we could, and we'd do the one Disneyland trip and then a boat ride, and they seemed to enjoy all these expositions and holidays that we went on, but they always and still do consider Slave Lake their home, and they're scattered all over the country now. And
we used to worry about our children being educated up in the North. We, the feeling, and still to this day, a lot of parents worry whether the education will be of a standard where they can do post-secondary and continue on with their careers. And so we had the same worries as well, but it soon became apparent as they grew older and entered high school that the educational system in Slave Lake was certainly adequate, and from record we could see that many of the students were graduating and moving on to post-secondary with great success, and as our children did as well. Our eldest daughter became a pharmacist, and both our sons are engineers, and thanks to the standards of excellence here in Slave Lake, they had a good foundation in their studies and performed very well and competed very well with their peers at other universities. So we felt gratified with our decisions in keeping them here.
And the kids still come home. The one is in Calgary as a pharmacist, one's in California playing hockey and resting his engineering degree, and our youngest is flying in and out of McMurray to Calgary as a petroleum engineer, but they still call Slave Lake home and get home here in the summers for barbecues and get-togethers. And Priscilla and I now probably feel that we're starting to kind of sort of show our wings, and with a few more doctors in town, which we have and which we've always believed in, that the more doctors the better, especially young doctors getting here. It gives the town a better service, and we continue to try and improve the medical service at this end in rural Alberta, and we still are working on that, bringing in and teaching residents and students here, so that eventually I think people will be able to have more services done in Slave Lake, more surgery, more complicated investigations in radiology and lab work, and they'll have to leave town less, and when they leave town, it won't have to be under stressful conditions for medical tests or anything, but maybe rather for holidays, and they can get away. And Priscille and I, now that the kids have gone away, we still have a lot of friends here. I think we're spending more time with the friends that we have had all along, and we've noted that a lot of people have come and gone from Slave Lake. Some have come back and for business reasons, and some of them come back to retire. Our plan is I'm going to continue work. My wife's going to take a few breaks here and there, and really wants to be retired. She wants to be officially retired, but they're still short of nurses, so she's still working. And we want some time off to travel and go here and there, but we want time now to enjoy the friends and tell stories with them, with the people of Slave Lake, and reminisce about all the times. And we're happy to tell the story about Slave Lake. We've seen it grow. I think Slave Lake now must be around 7,500 people. I know in our clinic charts and that we deal with a lot more than that, maybe 3 times that much in the winter time. And it is a busy place, and even though we don't know everybody in town, it still is a very friendly place to live. The people that we know and the children that are growing up are good people, and I think the education of our children is not just in the school, but with the parents and their friends. I think we all have to educate people and kids in growing up and being better people. I think you learn a lot just from talking to people and working with people, respecting people, and I think that makes a big difference. We've seen a dramatic increase in the job demands in the north, and Slave Lake is fortunate in that young children can live their whole life here, and when they do graduate, they can get a very good trade. They can become an electrician or a plumber, instrumentation, and come back to Slave Lake and do very well and enjoy things that Slave Lake was especially made for, fishing and hunting and all these things. And we certainly enjoy the lake, the cabin, and our friends very much so.
You mentioned in passing a clinic. Could you tell us how that came about?
Well, the clinic started when I first came up here. The clinic was in the old SLD building, and Dr. Cobden had rented a few rooms, and there was 2 of us, and we were the only 2 doctors at the time, and we practiced out of the clinic and rented from Slave Lake Developments. And then after a couple of years, we got a 3rd doctor in, and the place got too small, and the place was all rented out. So we looked outside the back windows, and there was the old Ulm house where the President Associated Medical Clinic lives. And Andy and I says, well, maybe they'll sell. And within a week, we had bought the property because the old folks had moved on. And it took us, I think, a year and a half and a lot of debt. And we built the Associate Medical Clinic, which is fairly close to the hospital and very close to where I live, and it all worked out well. And what started out as 2 or 3 doctors is now a 7-doctor clinic, and we have a psychologist in downstairs practicing, and we're very proud of that. And we continue to have doctors in this area, and the other clinic is staffed very well, and they have I think 5 or 6 doctors there. And it's notable to say that as one of the rural towns in Alberta, there are not too many in northern Alberta can boast to have 12 or 13 physicians in the town. The one trend that we've noticed is that as the English and Irish doctors who used to come over, as that supply route dried up a bit, we had the trend of South African doctors coming, and this was a great relief for us. The structure of the training in the local University of Alberta in Calgary just seems to make it that it's hard to bring these physicians out into rural Alberta. A lot of them tend to practice around a 50-mile radius out of the large urban centers, but the rural doctors have been well supplied by very competent South Africans. And if you look at our clinic now, we have 4 South Africans and two Irish physicians, and I'm the lone Canadian, so I'm kind of outnumbered. But it's a great group, and we get along well, and the other clinic has all that mixture and flair, and it works out well. We all share call at the hospital, and we just want to continue the good attitude and the good partnership working for the benefit of the patients in Slave Lake. And we're getting more and more services done at the hospital, and we have visiting consultants, and hopefully that'll grow to one day where we can have a full surgical and obstetrical suite and deliver all the babies in Slave Lake and do a lot more surgery. And that will come with hard work and dedicated people.
Are there any other key relationships in the community you'd like to tell us about that you have?
I think we developed the people that I've mentioned, but there are some people we forget. The one thing that I always bring up is I have 2 brothers who live in the city, and I always tell them that living in the country, the biggest benefit is that we know our neighbors. And our neighbors, wherever we've lived in Slave Lake, we've always known them. We talk to them almost daily. We share conversation with them. We share happy hours with them. We look after each other's houses and yards when they leave. And I think this is a big plus for
The other nice thing about, and I've noticed this just over the last few months, is if you need to buy anything locally, like a vehicle is a good example. We've had to purchase a few vehicles in the last few months here with our children. The service is so incredible because you know the owners of the dealers, and you're bringing business to them, keeping your money in the community. They're grateful. They provide an excellent service for you, and you know, they really try to do the best service for you. You know that they have your best interests at heart. And I really like that about a small town, whereas if you're in the city, you're just another number. They're interested in making a buck off you, and they really don't care beyond that. So our philosophy has always been to support our local businesses as much as we can. We try to spend everything we can locally if we need something, and I think that's important in keeping the economy going in the small community. So it's been good. It's been good.
Yeah, we have no trouble there. I don't think we've ever ran into trouble or severe animosities with anybody. One of the things that I think Priscille had mentioned earlier, but it may have not been picked up on the camera, is that we had some, when we first got here, we were befriended by an old priest, and his name was Father Joseph John, and he had been a missionary. He had been an oblate, and he would come over many a night with us and spin stories about the north, when he would take a dog team from Slave Lake, if you can imagine, all the way to Great Slave Lake, with his team of dogs in the wintertime just to pick up whitefish so that he could sell to the oil rigs on his way down, just so that he had enough money to run his parish in Wabasca Slave Lake. And I just thought that was a tremendous story, how anybody could, in his 60s and 70s, could run a dog team and be so dedicated to God. And we had a lot of other priests, Father Jolly, and Father Gary Laboucaine were other oblates who have donated their services to the North for the good of everybody, and are just super people, and we still try and keep in contact with them. But they are the real heroes of the North. They were very good in not just preaching the Word of God, but just being good people to everybody, and no matter where they lived. And they certainly solidified the community when they were here.
Paul's also dedicated a lot of his practice to the Native community through Wabasca, Trout Lake, Loon Lake, and has learned to speak the language, the Cree language, quite fluently over the years. And it's been actually quite a joy to see the surprise on their faces when he starts conversing with them in Cree at work, because you don't see very often a white man speaking their language, and they're very proud of it. And we've learned a lot of good things from their culture, from the way they are with each other. It's been a pleasure working with them as well over the years.
We used to, Priscilla and I, when we were working together a lot of the time, we used to deliver a baby from a lady from Trout Lake, and she would notice that we were man and wife and we were working together, and she would be a big grin and sort of ask her at time, well, who's the boss in the family? And I would say that Priscilla's the boss, and we would deliver her 12th or 15th child. And I remember the record, I think, was a girl who delivered, 18 or 21 children. And they were wondering why we only had 3 kids, but we had a lot of laugh those days, and we don't see the big family.
Last week you had a patient that came in and said, when she saw you walk in the room, she said, "Oh, are you still alive?"
Yeah, my practice is getting old, and my old boss, Dr. Cobbin, used to say is that when you've delivered the babies of babies, then you've been around. So I've delivered, when I first came here in 75, I delivered young girls, and then those babies that I delivered, I've delivered them. And now, and I'm on my third generation, and I've delivered them, and I think it's time now to slow down a little bit, because that's really pushing the pin, and I'm leaving the young guys do that unless it's really necessary. But it's nice to see these kids grow up, and they still remember you, and the community it's great. We're not leaving. We're gonna stay and enjoy the people, enjoy the country. And our kids keep coming back here, and they still want to call this home. So we're happy with everything the way it's going, and I don't think we have anything
more to say.
I would like Paul to say something in Cree to the future viewers of this video.
I could say Kawapamatam Asumina, which means goodbye until we meet again, my friend. And Iksimaga means goodbye, and Mio Tipskal means good night, and Mercy is thank you, Bob. And so from both of us, Iksimaga.
On that note, the Slave Lake Adult Education Committee thanks you for sharing your memories and stories